So, contracts. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? Probably a stack of papers, right? Tiny print, lots of jargon, lawyers, the whole 9 yards. But what if I told you that contracts are everywhere, woven into the fabric of our everyday lives in ways we barely even notice? In fact, I'd bet you've already made a few contracts just today.
I mean, think about it. Did you grab a coffee on your way to work, stream a movie last night, sign up for that gym you've been meaning to go to? Yeah, those all seem like pretty normal, simple things, don't they?
Well, surprise. In every single one of those cases, you made a contract, a real, legally binding agreement. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. The entire life story of a contract, from that first handshake moment all the way to how things can sometimes, well, fall apart.
All right, first things first. What even is a contract? Because it's a whole lot more than just a piece of paper with some signatures scrawled at the bottom. Okay, so here's the textbook definition. At its heart, a contract is just a promise that the law will actually back up. And that's the magic word, right there, enforceable. It means if someone breaks their promise to you, you're not just out of luck, you can actually do something about it. And here's a big one that trips a lot of people up. Contracts do not always have to be written down. Sure, having it in writing makes it a heck of a lot easier to prove what you agreed on. But a verbal deal, a handshake agreement, that can be just as real and just as binding, as long as you've got all the right pieces in place. Speaking of pieces, let's talk about the essential ingredients. For any deal to actually count as a contract in the eyes of the law, it needs a few key things. You can think of it like baking a cake, right? If you forget the flour or the eggs, you're not going to end up with a cake. You're just going to have a mess. So here's our recipe. You've got your offer, your acceptance, and this kind of weird-sounding one called consideration. We'll get to that in a sec. Those are the big three. But you also need everyone to actually intend to make a deal. They need to have the legal capacity to do it, so they're of sound mind and age, and the terms have to be clear. You miss any one of these, and your contract could be toast. Okay, this is a super important one. There's a huge difference between a real offer and what the law calls an invitation to treat. So, you see that fancy watch in the shop window with a price tag? That's not the shop offering to sell it to you. Nope. It's an invitation for you to come in and make an offer to them. When you put it on the counter, you're the one making the offer, and they can either accept it or not.
All right, let's tackle consideration. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's simply the what's in it for me part of the deal. The value that each person gives up. It could be money, sure, but it could also be a service, a promise to do something, or even a promise not to do something. And the courts have famously said they don't care if the deal is fair, as long as something of value is exchanged. Even if it's just a mere peppercorn, that's usually good enough. It's all about the exchange, not the price tag.
Okay, so you've baked the perfect contract cake. All the ingredients are there. It's beautiful. But what happens when someone doesn't follow the recipe? What happens when a promise gets broken? Well, that's what we call a breach.
A breach of contract is exactly what it sounds like. One person fails to do what they promised, and they don't have a legitimate excuse for it. Plain and simple. But, as you're about to see, not all breaches are created equal. Not by a long shot. Basically, the law splits breaches into two camps. First, you've got your minor breach. Think of this as a smaller problem. Yeah, you can sue for money to cover any costs, but you still have to stick with the contract. Then you have the major breach. This one is a big deal. It cuts to the very heart of the agreement, and it gives you the power to not only sue for damages, but to walk away from the whole thing completely.
Let me give you a classic example that really shows how this works. Picture this. A homeowner is getting a new house built. They put a clause in the contract that's super specific. It says all the plumbing pipes must be red. So the house gets finished, the homeowner goes to check it out, and what do they find? Blue pipes. Now, these blue pipes are just as good as the red ones. They work perfectly. They're just blue. So technically, the contractor definitely breached the contract, right?
So the big question is, what happens now? How much money does the homeowner get for this mistake? Do they get enough to tear down the walls and replace every single pipe just to make them red? What do you think?
The answer from the court? A big fat zero. Nothing. Why on earth? Because even though there was a breach, the homeowner didn't actually lose any money. The house's value was exactly the same. It was a classic minor breach, and since there was no financial loss, there were no damages to award. It's a perfect illustration of the principle.
And that whole pipe story really gets to the heart of it. Contract law isn't about punishing people for messing up. It's about making the other person whole again, compensating them for what they actually lost. So let's check out the different tools a court can use to fix a broken deal. These are the remedies.
Okay, the most common fix by far is just money, what the law calls damages. But sometimes money just won't cut it. Like if you're buying a unique piece of art, a court could order specific performance, which literally forces the seller to give you the painting. Other times they can cancel the whole contract, that's rescission, or make the bad guy give back any benefits they got, which is restitution.
Now, a big dramatic breach is one way for a contract to end, for sure. But thankfully, most contracts have a much happier or at least a much calmer ending.
The fancy legal word for a contract ending is discharge, and there are a bunch of ways it can happen. The best way, and the most common, is performance. Everybody just does what they said they were going to do. Easy. But deals can also end if both sides agree to call it quits, or because of a major breach like we talked about, or even through something called frustration. That's when some crazy, unforeseen event makes the whole thing impossible.
Here's a cool example of ending a contract by agreement. It's called novation. This is basically when everyone agrees to tear up the old contract and replace it with a brand new one. Maybe you're changing the rules, or maybe you're even swapping one of the people out for someone else. The important thing is the old contract is gone for good.
So, there you have it. From a simple click or a handshake all the way to its grand finale, that's the life of a contract. And knowing this stuff isn't just for law students, you know? It really empowers you to understand what's happening in all those little agreements you're making every single day.
So let's quickly recap your new contract toolkit. Takeaway number 1, a real contract needs that specific recipe of ingredients to be valid. 2, not all breaches are the same. The fix depends on how bad the problem is. 3, damages are king. It's usually about compensating, not punishing. And finally, every contract has an end date, one way or another.
And that leads me to one last question for you. Think about all those times you've scrolled to the bottom of a page and clicked that little box. I agree. You're making a contract every single time. So now that you know what that really means, are you ever going to look at that button the same way again?